Be a man. So everybody who's born with male anatomy is told to be a man when they grow up. And I heard it in a wide variety of ways from a wild variety of sources. Television, of course, the Roman Catholic Church, my parents, my classmates, my friends, sometimes the books I read. Sometimes the message was explicit. Don't cry. Be brave. Fight back. Jump off that roof. Some of the messages were more fun than others. Sometimes it was unspoken. Movies where only men stood up to bullies and women exist only as romantic partners to these heroic men. I participated in a religion where only men can lead mass and offer absolution. Saturday morning cartoons where only males gave the orders in a crisis. So I grew up in the suburbs of Buffalo, New York, and I knew then that I was on a journey to become a man. I was hoping to belong to the tribe of men. And I had no idea where to go or how to do it. In the beginning, I thought it meant that I had to become stoic and fearless. Boys get a lot of toxic messages from the world. Violence and threats are acceptable tools. Do you remember the TV show, The Honeymooners? I'm really going back here. With Jackie Gleason. Jackie Gleason would yell, "Someday, Alice, pow, right in the kisser," waving that fist. And we laughed, and we laughed. It was his signature line. Well, I was not Jackie Gleason. I was a shy and socially awkward and bookish kid. And in the culture that I grew up in, there were no rituals of initiation into manhood. I suppose maybe high school football might represent that for some men. I played volleyball for my high school, and I have a news flash. Volleyball is not perceived as a test of masculinity. And I went to college still feeling unproven and unvalidated as a man. But after college, I joined the Marine Corps, where I was an artillery officer, and then I was set. I never had to prove my masculinity after that. And a funny thing happened after I left the Corps. I found myself more free to be the kind of man that I wanted to be. I had proven that I was tough, and that gave me permission to be gentle and kind. And I began to see that my real power lay not in relying on my strength and size to get my way, but rather to use my strength to protect the vulnerable. So that was cool for me, I guess, but isn't that ridiculous that I had to do the uber macho thing first before I arrived in that healthier place? So after the Marine Corps, I did a variety of human service jobs in places like homeless shelters and residential programs for developmentally disabled adults. And in these places of intense vulnerability, I learned to use my so-called masculine traits to help people feel safe. But my journey wasn't over yet by a long shot. I began to work in more diverse communities with more diverse coworkers. I started at a place called City Year, which is an AmeriCorps program. It's kind of like an urban Peace Corps, where young people do community service for a year. And there, I began the long and slow and fumbling process of understanding the dynamics of racism and sexism and homophobia. And I found that knowing how to be kind was not enough. I needed to know, as a straight white man, how to be wrong. And by that I mean I needed to acknowledge the places where I was holding bias. I needed to admit that the way I was looking at the world was wrong. That was hard then. It's still hard now. Now, if it seems like I'm patting myself on the back here, I need to acknowledge that it's easy for me to say that being masculine isn't important when I look the way I do, when I present. I'm tall, I present as heterosexual, I have a deep voice, and I think if I was more stereotypically feminine in my presentation, I might have a different feeling about the value of masculinity. And I also want to acknowledge that this is only my story, and I can't tell the story for whom the story for people for whom gender is much more complicated. For trans and non-binary folks, and by non-binary I mean folks who choose not to be placed in the category of either male or female, these notions of masculinity and femininity have very different purposes and very different powers. Different stuff is going on. And I, like a lot of other men, have a long way to go of having a healthy relationship with my feelings and the expression of those feelings. So the author Bell Hooks wrote a wonderful book entitled The Will to Change: Men, Masculinity, and Love. And I want to share a brief reading from the book that really opened things up for me. So this is Bell Hooks' voice. The masculine pretense is that real men feel no pain. The reality is that men are hurting, and that the whole culture responds to them by saying, "Please, do not tell us how you feel." If we cannot heal what we cannot feel, let me say that again. If we cannot heal what we cannot feel by supporting a patriarchal culture that socializes men to deny feelings, we doom them to live in states of emotional numbness. We construct a culture where male pain can have no voice, where male hurt cannot be named or healed. And that was from The Will to Change by Bell Hooks. So think about the response. I don't know if you remember this, seems like so long ago, when President Obama, he cried during his speech about gun control and how he got pilloried. And the fact is, pain always finds a way to express itself. And I think a lot of the fear and rage that gets expressed politically right now has its roots in pain being expressed in unhealthy ways, especially by men. So now you can see the things that I was struggling with, and I still struggle with, in order to become a whole person, no longer have anything to do with being a man. And I realize now that what some call being a man are just character traits that anybody and any body can have. So I remember Malala back 2012, 2013. She was a 15-year-old girl from Pakistan who won the Nobel Peace Prize. Remember her? So when the Taliban came on her school bus with guns and they asked, "Who is Malala?" she said, "I am." And they shot her in the head, but she's still fighting for the right of girls to get educated. And can we look at Malala and say that bravery has a gender? Let me summarize. Gender roles are nonsense. And when I say nonsense, I'm thinking another word that I can't say from the pulpit. What I understand now is it's this term like be a man, to belong to the tribe of men. This belonging is really two things: behaving like a man and being seen as a man. So according to this toxic culture, behaving like a man means I'm limited in the ways that I can dress and present myself. Trousers only. It's transgressive to wear pink. I'm limited in the ways that I can express my emotions with a strong preference towards anger, cultural preference. And I'm expected to be violent in certain situations. However, being seen as a man, presenting as a man in this culture means that I get listened to when I talk, whether I know what I'm talking about or not. I'm less likely to have my presence in any situation questioned by others. I'm just here, taking up space. And people are more likely to do what I tell them to. And I'm less likely to get physically attacked. Now, all those privileges would be less true if I was a man and queer, or a man and a person of color, or a man and anything other than middle or upper middle class economically. So where did my journey from learning to be tough, to learning to be gentle, to learning to be wrong take me? For me, the next part of the journey involves some different tasks. I need to watch those places where those toxic messages about maleness come in. And it's really hard for me to undo this after all this training. So here's an example. So have you ever noticed how we men love to explain? It's actually one of my deepest fears about being a new minister is that I will become a blowhard. So if you see me going in that direction, give me a gentle nudge, gentle. But I know men for whom their only means of making conversation is telling someone else what they know. And there's this great book called Men Explain Things to Me by Rebecca Solnit. Anybody read that? Oh man, she's so good. So in that book, she tells a story about a time she was at a cocktail party with a female friend, and they're chatting when an older man approaches them and says to her, I hear that you've written a couple books. And she says, several, actually. It's more than several, but she's being modest. And he asked her what they were about, and she began to talk about her most recent book, which was about technology in the American West in the 1800s. And as she spoke, he cut her off, saying, have you heard about a very important topic, a very important book on that topic that came out last year? And he began to explain it to her. And she, out of culturally ingrained habit, deferred to him, and she heard him out on the very slim possibility that another book had come out on the same topic, and somehow she'd failed to notice it. So the man held forth, enjoying his deep knowledge and authority, and he was, of course, describing her book. And her friend interrupted him to say, that's her book. But he continued. And finally, after the fourth, that's her book right here, he stopped. And of course, it turned out that he hadn't read the book, he'd only read a review. And so explaining as a way of communicating is annoying for sure, but it also makes me sad. And I've surely done it myself. I love the sound of my voice. But it also means that I'm not learning. And I'm not genuinely connecting with someone in a conversation that's a mutual exchange, and that's a loss. When I'm explaining, I'm not empathizing. And that guy missed out on an opportunity to have an amazing conversation with a brilliant person because he was too busy explaining. It's a loss for him. His life is less because of that. I'm spending a lot of time these days thinking about the sources of the poisonous masculinity in these Me Too days. And I know that the culture we're in teaches men not to have empathy for women, not to consider their particular vulnerabilities and pains. We're taught not to care about the lives of women. And then it happens that we grow to love some women, maybe our family, our friends, our coworkers, and we realize we need to change. And it's such hard work to teach ourselves a new way. But we have to open our hearts to the pain of others and let that pain teach us a new way. That means feeling. That means trying to feel. And we men need to be honest with ourselves. Men are really good at walking the line between making an innocent remark and turning the conversation in an unwelcome direction. And we learn to maintain that plausible deniability. We make an uninvited comment about a woman's appearance, and when we get pushback, we say, hey, what's the problem? I was just trying to be nice. But I really think in our hearts we know better. We need to listen to our hearts. So, by the way, my female colleagues in the clergy have story after story of receiving unwanted evaluations of their clothing and their hair and their bodies. And I've been here 2 months now, and no one has said anything about my appearance, which surely deserves comment. What's up with the beard, dude? My female clergy colleagues, they tell stories about having to fend off touches, embraces, even kisses in the receiving line. I don't deal with that. And it doesn't just happen with women ministers, it happens to all women. And we have to, I say this to men in this room, my brothers, we have to do better. We have to find a new way. Now, I know I've said some hard things, and I also know that there's a lot of men in this room that these things don't apply to at all. and I'm grateful for you. And I also say, we men who would never do those things, we can learn a new way too. We can learn to interrupt those times when we see or hear something that we know isn't right. We can interrupt. We can use our privilege to stand in the way and say, not cool, my man, not cool. It's hard, but it's deeply satisfying to do the right thing. And the beauty of this new way is that it really is a win-win. Remember that quote from Bell Hooks about how men are taught to shut up about their feelings? How men are taught essentially to have no compassion for themselves? Cultivating empathy works both ways. As we build our ability to be tender with the pain that other people feel, we also need to build our ability to be tender with our own pain. I mean, there's this great irony that in the attempt to belong to the club of men, we end up being much more lonely. This is a path to less loneliness. Whatever the changes that we want to make in our own lives, we know that it's so hard. And I also wonder if we don't sometimes operate under a false premise. So to paraphrase the wonderful Franciscan theologian Richard Rohr, also a citizen of Albuquerque, many of us we're taught that we would be loved or whole if only we would change. Be loved or whole if only we would change. In fact, we are already loved enough so we can change. We're loved enough. And we need to only recognize the ways that we are loved. It's the experience of love that becomes the engine of change. For me and my ideas about masculinity, that love took the form of people, mostly women to be honest, who were patient with me, who understood when I screwed up, who taught me, who were role models. And all that love allowed me to change and go on just a little bit further in my journey. And I say this sincerely, that love is available to all of us, everyone in this room, all of us. We are loved now, and we can change. We are enough now, and we can change. We are whole now, and we can change. So let us continue to support each other and to call each other in with love when we don't quite live into our best selves. I'm glad to be traveling in such good company and buoyed by the presence of love as we go on life's journey together. Amen, and blessed be.
I'd like to